Honaso. So this morning, quite soon, we'll go into the third phase of this sequence of meditations of shamatha without a sign. Finally, only the last phase, I think, is really shamatha without a sign. And we'll get to that in our second session this morning, right at the end of the session. So the rest is all kind of building up to that, showing that it's not so easy to do nothing at all. I know I've heard His Holiness say, but I couldn't find the source, that echoing a theme that goes from Dzogchen all the way through. And that is, if you just release all activity completely, just utterly release all activity of your human body, human speech, human mind, everything, coarse, medium, subtle, just release all activity while remaining radiantly clear, discerning, bright. Oh. Then the pranas go right into the central channel, and you can realize Dharmakaya. But then he comments, but that's not so easy. I remember, I can see his face, and he was actually chuckling at the end. That's not so easy. So, while shamatha without a sign, the briefest, most concise explanation of this practice, pith instruction I've ever seen, is from one of the most brilliant minds in Tibet who wrote 18 volumes. Each one is like encyclopedic. Just this incredibly complex mind. The detail of his philosophical sophistication staggers the imagination, let alone his erudition. Just, I can really hardly even imagine it. And this is Tsongkhapa. And when Tsongkhapa himself comes to giving his pith instructions on shamatha without a sign, without calling it such, but it's perfectly clear that's what it is. He says, you ready for Tsongkhapa's pith instructions? Just focus on the sheer luminosity and sheer cognizance of awareness. That's it. And of course, the luminosity and cognizance of which you are aware, see my finger, is not something you're looking at. Because it is with the sheer luminosity and cognizance of your awareness that you're attending to the luminosity and cognizance of your awareness. It's not somebody else's, it's not another one. Hence, shamatha without a sign. So this point has been philosophically debated on many occasions, at least going back to Shantideva. And you can see it right there in the 9th chapter, the wisdom chapter of his great text. And that is it possible for consciousness actually to illuminate itself? Is it possible for consciousness to illuminate itself? And he's writing this, and he responds from a prasangika madhyamika perspective. And he said, no. A candle flame doesn't illuminate itself, because if it were, then there would have to be the illuminator and the illuminated, and there'd have to be two. Like, hello, candle over there, I'm going to give you some light here. That never happens. And then he gives another example, any more than a knife can cut itself. I mean, you can switch that knife around really quickly, but not so fast you can ever have it cut itself, clearly. And one can give more examples, but that will do. So he says, therefore, consciousness cannot illuminate itself. Yeah? At the same time, there have been countless proponents of prasangika madhyamika, which he is promoting, such as Panchen Losar Chökyi and countless others, who is absolutely a straight follower of Shantideva, Chantakirti, Buddha Palita, and so forth, that do teach the practices we've been doing here. As Tsongkhapa himself says, focus on the sheer luminosity and cognizance of awareness, and you may then experience bliss, luminosity, and non-conceptuality. So they're not refuting Shantideva or Chantakirti, and so philosophically, and I won't linger here, but philosophically, what's going on? When we really do have a clear sense that you're aware of being aware. And I think we've all had that, right? Even right now, you're aware that you're aware. And when you're doing the practice, you're simply doing less than what you're doing right now. Because right now, you are aware of being aware, but you're probably also aware of your body and my speech and the lights, the room, and so forth. So it's awareness of awareness with many layers of clothing. But it's still there. And as I've said before, it is rather important that when we're doing this practice, the only real effort, after we've gone through some of these preliminary exercises, the oscillation and so on, but when you come to the culmination of it, which we'll do in the second session this morning, the only effort in terms of sustaining that clear flow of awareness, the only effort needed is to not do anything else. Because right now, how much effort are you giving to being aware of being aware? Isn't it really literally zero? You don't kind of get pooped out once in a while and continue to be aware, but not aware of being aware. There's just no effort at all, right? It maybe takes some effort for me to be aware of Stuart. That could be, oh, there he is. That took a little bit of effort, Stuart. I can do it. But then I get tired out. Oh, I'm tired of looking at Stuart. I can't do it anymore. So what's the point here? How do we understand this philosophically? And that it's very simple. And that is, in the overall Buddhist understanding, really just everywhere, with subtle nuances here and there of interpretation, consciousness, like every other impermanent or conditioned phenomenon in the universe, so no exception, nothing special. In other words, once again, the obvious, that's obvious to everybody except for the materialist, is that consciousness is as natural as anything else. It's not supernatural, it's not mystical, it's just as natural as matter and energy, space and time. Just it's there, and it's not derivative of anything else. It really should be obvious. So, having said that, then like every other conditioned phenomenon in the universe, whether it's material or mental or something neither one, it's arising from moment to moment. It's not only impermanent in the sense that sooner or later it will come to an end, but the real meaning of impermanence throughout all of Buddhism is, the core meaning is that from moment to moment it's always in a process of change, which means from moment to moment arising, passing, rising, passing, rising, passing, everywhere in Buddhism. So consciousness is no exception to that. And then we can ask, well, how fast is it rising? Because what we have here is a quantized version of consciousness. It's not spaghetti, it's BBs. Spaghetti would just be a continuous stream with no breaks, just spaghetti. Whereas photon theory is not spaghetti photons, but discrete, extremely fast, but discrete corpuscles of light. In other words, consciousness is not simply a smooth continuum, as in did I say consciousness? Energy is not simply a smooth continuum, but this was the great breakthrough of quantum mechanics, and it was Einstein that gave the word for it. Photon, a little corpuscle of energy, travels at the speed of light, but it's distinct. You can shoot out one BB, one photon, and they do that. The technology is so good. And so in a similar fashion then, just as energy is quantized, well, in the Buddhist view, consciousness, of course, is quantized. Even space. It's only that Dalai Lama emphasized this a lot from Kalachakra, that even space in the Kalachakra system consists of little quanta of space. That space also comes in little space particles, that's what he said. It's classic. And so, coming back here, that then consciousness is arising as like strobe light, like that. And then you say, well, then this means that each pulse, each impulse of consciousness is finite in duration. It's beginning and then has an end. And so how long is that? And there are some variations, but the classic interpretation throughout, I think, all of Indo-Tibetan Buddhism is that since they didn't have clocks or very fine chronometers and so forth, but everybody had fingers, and so they would listen to that very closely. How long did that last? 10. 10 pulses of cognition. 10. I can't do that, but it seemed like somebody could. And so 10 pulses, 10 spikes of awareness, consciousness, in a finger snap. Then I looked up how long does a finger snap last. It's a tenth of a second. And so that would be 1/665. So 1/650 of a second, between 1 and 2 milliseconds. And so that's the idea then, that you have these staccato bursts, there's another nice term, these staccato bursts, like that, of consciousness. But then 2 milliseconds, according to Buddhism and modern cognitive psychology, both agree that at least for the likes of us, there could be exceptional people that we can't imagine, but for ordinary people, at least like me, myself, I don't know whether you're an ordinary or not, but I am, that an ordinary person cannot ascertain anything in 2 milliseconds. This can be demonstrated. I mean, the psychologists, and they do this, they can flash a burst of light like a triangle on a screen. They can make it as short as they like, really. They can do that, and so you can have a subject looking at a screen, and then they just show a yellow triangle that lasts only 2 milliseconds. And the person's looking at right there, they won't see it. See, go ahead, you can do it any time now. And they won't see it. It's too short. Too short. So consciousness bundles itself. And that is one individual moment, I say more or less 2 milliseconds, can't cognize anything. But then there's kind of a binding that takes place, or a bundling takes place. And it's very much like people playing, there must be a name for it, when you have a rope, like going across a river, and then you have people tugging on both sides. What's that called? Pulling a rope? Tug of war with a rope, there we go. But what you have, we've all seen this, right? So it's easy. You have 10 people on both sides, and it's a nice hot summer day, and if they lose, they just get to be pulled into the river and everybody laughs. But those 10 people are all doing the same thing on each side, and so they're bundled. And are these 10 people stronger than these 10 people? Somebody's going into the water. And so it's very much like that these individual people, the 10, all lined up on the same rope, a sequence of 10, let's say 10 pulses, 10 moments, they will bundle, and then collectively, they may indeed, if it's 20 milliseconds, that right on the threshold of an ordinary person, if you show that yellow triangle for 20 milliseconds, it's right on the lower edge of possibility for an ordinary person, and then you show it and then you mask it, because I've participated in an experiment like this. If you have to mask it, that is blotted out with something. Otherwise, it can have an echo effect in the visual cortex. And even if you didn't pick it up in 20 milliseconds, you could pick up the echo. So they mask it, then there's no echo. I don't know if my words are clear or not. I can't do better. But in 20 milliseconds, right on the edge, if you're really very quick, you have temporal vividness, you might be able to pick up. But those 10 collectively are able to pull the rope across and ascertain a yellow triangle. So maybe I'm just using 2 words. I don't know if this is interesting. I find so many things interesting that other people don't. But what's happening here, so let's say it's 10, or if you like 20, so now it's 40 milliseconds. For sure, 40 milliseconds. If you've just had your cappuccino and you're wide awake, 40 milliseconds, you should be able to pick up something. So let's say 40 milliseconds. In our practice right now, say, all right, I'm just going to be aware of being aware. So what you'll be having there is bundles of these bursts lasting 40 milliseconds, and they will be able to retrospectively ascertain, like looking over their shoulder. The latter moment is called Jatsoki Kechikma. Dute Kechikma is the shortest moment, and that would be like 2 milliseconds, finite. Bear in mind, it's finite. Only conceptually can you say half of that indefinitely. But in fact, it's 2 milliseconds, it's finite period. And so, collectively, a bundle of these moments of awareness will collectively ascertain the preceding bundle of 40 milliseconds. And then the later one preceding. So you're always looking over your shoulder and you are ascertaining the preceding bundle of awareness. But it's always retrospective. So in fact there is, even though it's very hard to ascertain this experientially, there is in fact a subject-object relationship. But it's all consciousness, right? But it is retrospective, so you're always looking back over your shoulder and picking up the immediately preceding bundle of consciousness, but it's very short-term memory, you're not clouding it with anything else. And so when you do that in a stream, the experience of it will be just an ongoing flow, especially if you're in deep samadhi, just an ongoing flow of awareness. So now to reconcile this with Shantideva, he's quite correct. Neither a 2 millisecond burst or a 40 millisecond bundle of bursts are able to ascertain themselves. They can't illuminate themselves, but they can illuminate the immediately preceding, in which case now you have a subject-object relationship. So in a very subtle way, there is a referent, but not referent in the sense of you're turning your eyeballs back in and saying, can I remember the last one? No, experientially, there isn't any referent, because you're just resting right there in the awareness of being aware. So that's that. Might be useful. I know that's a little bit intellectual. We're going now to the practice, though. And so in the last session yesterday, then we were looking right in upon the experienced sense of being an agent. And especially when it comes to terms of mental activity, it's very clear that that which is doing the action mentally, like meditating, remembering, thinking, getting angry, feeling compassionate, that which is actually doing it is the mind. And then we may designate ourselves upon the basis of our minds, which are not a person, and then say, I was experiencing compassion, I was thinking, remembering, I was meditating. That's fine. And so that's what we do. But instead of just adding more complexity to this experientially, then instead of looking inwards and say, how do I look? Just look, well, just never mind that. What's actually doing the meditating, the actual agent in this case, is the mind. So just look right in upon the mind that is the agent, because after all, in a sense, you're kind of an afterthought. You're something designated upon the mind that doesn't really add anything to it, except for, okay, now you've identified with it. So the sense of agency. Now again, I don't know, probably it must be thousands by now. Thousands of philosophical, psychological, and neuroscientific articles and books have been written about the nature of intention, free will, lack of free will, and so forth. What is the agent? And the crudest one, I think, is that the brain is the agent, and that's still going around a lot. It's just like a virus for which people just haven't found the antidote. They just haven't found a remedy. The notion of reducing people to brains, it's still, I mean, you just want to spray pesticide at it or whatever, just die. But it's very, very intelligence resistant. So people still keep on clinging to the notion. It's all over the place in the media, that the brain does this, the brain does that, train your brain, meditate a lot. The real juice is you can train your brain. As if that's the point of meditation, that your brain changes. Who gives a fig about whether your brain changes or not? How would you even know? What you know is how your mind changes, how your heart changes, your behavior changes. And so, brain, you can help out, but don't take the credit for anything. Pipe down. Because this is where the real juice is happening. So, without belaboring that point, I'm getting something very crucial now, pertaining to the next practice. And that is, if I ask, how do you conceive of yourself as the agent? Who do you think you are as an agent? Then you can write an article. If you've studied it more, thought about it more, you write a book. If you think about it more, you could write a multiple volume book, and you can tell me all your thoughts about what you think you are as an agent. And all of those will be unhinged, separate from, frozen in comparison to your actual experience. What does it feel like? What's your experience of being an agent? So in this practice, you see the instruction is one paragraph, literally. That's not even an article. That's an abstract. And that is, when you look inwards, what is your experience of being? Do you have a sense of being agent, or is that just something somebody made up? Do you have a sense of when you do something voluntarily, you made a decision, you intend, and you willfully do it, as opposed to other occasions when just something comes up, and you say, I didn't mean it, or I didn't mean to sneeze, or I didn't mean to hiccup, I didn't mean to have somebody hit you on the knee, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't do that, it happens. Do you have a clear sense of when your actions of body, speech, and mind, do you have a sense? It's just an experiential question. Do you have a sense when stuff is just happening and you really did not do it, versus times you did do it? I intentionally thought about that. I intended to do this. I meant to say apple. There it came. I tend to raise my hand as opposed to others. If you do have that clear sense of being an agent on occasion, and other occasion not being the agent, it just came up. Then what you're looking at in that practice from yesterday is, what is your sense? When you feel, I'm doing something voluntarily, I'm taking responsibility for this, I thought about it, I made a decision, and I'm doing it on the basis of my decision, right? That's what we were looking at yesterday. So if I ask you, who do you think you are as an agent, you could write articles, books, what have you. But please try to put into words. It's what Padmasambhava is suggesting here. Please try to put into words, as much as you can, even it will be a rough approximation, What's your experience of being agent? What comes to mind when you sense yourself as being the one who's doing something? It's probably not going to be a big book. It might be a line or two. Today we'll go subtler. That was yesterday. But it's just to see what comes up. That's why I said there's no right answer, no wrong answer. I'm not jockeying you or trying to maneuver you to get the right answer. Sometimes I do. When there's a right answer and I know it, then I'll ask until you get the right answer. That's fine. 1 + 1, there's a right answer. But here, there isn't a right answer. It's whatever you experience, that, as long as you're being honest and perceptive, that's the right answer. But now we go subtler. Because after all, we're not always doing something. Let's just pause for just a second, 10 seconds, and not do anything at all. Continue doing not anything at all, except, if you will, listen to my voice and understand. That's doing a little bit. And so I'll pause so you can actually do it. When you're just sitting there after my voice stops and you're really doing nothing, here's my question for what I'd like you to do when I stop speaking. When you're sitting there and really not doing anything at all, as far as you can tell, do you have a sense of being the observer? Someone who is aware, someone who is present. Are you there? Who's there? What comes to mind? So once again, we're finished. You may come out now. If I asked you, how do you think of yourself as being an observer? You start writing your essay and many, many books. What does it mean to be an observer? An observer is different than an agent. Doing something takes some effort, whereas simply being aware, there's no effort. You just sit there and don't give any effort at all, and what's left is awareness is happening, and then the question is there a sense of your being the observer? And that's where we're going in this next session. It's subtler than observing your experience. What is your experience of being the agent? When you're releasing and inverting, who's doing that? You're doing it voluntarily. You must know that. So what is your sense? Okay, we did that yesterday. And now we'll go subtler. And that is just the sense of, even when I'm just sitting, minding my own business and doing nothing at all, do I have a sense of being the referent of a noun? Not an action, not a process, but the observer. And is your experience of being the observer? Is it changing or unchanging? Does it fizz or is it frozen? So, as I mentioned before yesterday, very important, and we'll go into it much deeper this morning, I believe. If you want to understand the nature of existence of anything at all, space, time, matter, mind, consciousness, want to know its actual nature, which is its ultimate nature, its ultimate mode of existence, then first of all, you just have to know what's the question? And that is, what is it for which I'm seeking its ultimate nature, its ultimate mode of existence, as opposed to how it appears, right? So mode of appearance, mode of existence, all the way through Madhyamaka. And we saw this in the Heart Sutra. All of samsara is like a dream. Nirvana is like a dream. And Subhuti said, if there were something else beyond samsara and nirvana, I will already say that too is like a dream, right? Well, when he's saying it's like a dream, he's saying exactly, like all of the 10 analogies, the way of appearance and the way it actually exists, different, like a dream, right? And so, when it comes to who are you, if we make it really slender beyond gender, ethnicity, age, and all that business, which are all just kind of quilts, layers on top of. But if we just go back to the nucleus, okay, who are you really? Then I am an agent and then seeing, okay, you are an agent, that's fine, we're not doubting that, we're not questioning that any more than we're questioning the existence of atoms. You are an agent, yes, you are morally responsible. Yes, that's true. And so there has to be someone who is morally responsible. You can't have no one or nothing be morally responsible. Makes no sense. So we're not questioning that. It's very important to really affirm that. Otherwise, all moral responsibility is gone, and everybody do whatever they like. Oh, I couldn't help it. So who is, on a conventional, relative level, in terms of way of appearance, who are you as an agent? And get a clear sense of that. That's what this is about. This is shamatha. And then who are you as the one who is observing? Observing this and that and this and that. Observing dreams when you're asleep. Observing waking experiences, other people, your job. What is the referent of I, the observer, or the mind as observer? Not ultimately, just relatively. And you are an observer. You are an observer. Let's just put this into classic Madhyamaka framework. It's really simple and very deep. So we're not questioning this. If people do, they just really don't understand Madhyamaka. If they say, oh no, there's no thinker, there are only thoughts. Well, okay, you're not going to go very far with that, but if that helps you, knock yourself out. But it's trivial. There are objects, so let's just deal with observation. There's that which I observe. So there's Casca right in front of me. I'm observing her. There is my observation of her. This is the flow of consciousness, being aware of Casca, this person. And then there is the one, I'm over here. I'm a person, I'm an observer, and I'm aware of Casca. So we have the observed, the act, the flow, the process of observation, and there is an agent. Yes, I'm observing her. And to start making up some phony artificial language where, oh, there's no observer, there's only observation. You can do that while you're playing around in Buddhist philosophy, and as soon as you stop playing around, you're back in the real world, you're going to start talking about observers again. So this is why Prasangika is so insistent, don't disengage from ordinary language and make up your own special language. Oh, we Buddhists don't believe in the self. We don't believe there's a thinker. We believe there's only thoughts. That's very nice when you're having your little tea party among Buddhists. But as soon as the tea party's over, then everybody's talking normally again. And are you observer? What do you think about this? Oh, I think this. Oops. Shouldn't have said that. But you do say that because you do mean it, and that's what you really think, and the rest is basically superficial mental entertainment. So then we just face the fact. This is how we think, this is how we experience. There's the observed, the observation, and the observer. Fine. And then we're not questioning that, because we won't question it as soon as we get off the couch and we're riding a bus, driving a car. You're a driver, I'm a driver, we're driving, and there's the object. It's just everywhere. So no escaping it. The Buddha said, I paraphrase, we use language, we use thought, but don't be fooled by it. And so we have the triad. Now we're going really core Madhyamaka. Today's a day for Madhyamaka. We have a triad, and we're not questioning the element that there are three elements to the triad: the known, the knower, the known, the knowing, and the knower. Right? The thoughts, the thinker, and the object of the thought. And so in this one, we're going now very soon, is the observed, the observation, and then the observer. Right? Well, each of these is equally existent. One doesn't have more mass or more heaviness or ontological status than the other. They're on exactly the same plane. But if you like to cut right to the chase, just put a knife right into the heart. I don't mean anything violent here, but right into the heart. Go right to the nucleus of Madhyamaka's middle way. And that is the observed, the observation, and the observer all do exist. And they're not the same. They're very important. They're not the same at all, right? They really are different. The observed, the observation, and the observer. But if, as a thought experiment, you get your tweezers in there and you just pluck out the observation, you're just gone. There's no observed and there's no observer. There's no observed object if there's no observation. And there's no observer if there's no observation. And yet the observed and the observer are not the same as observation. So how is that possible? You have three things that are distinct. They're not the same at all. And yet if you annihilate one or just pluck it out, the other two vanish instantly. And I mean instantly. Not as cause and effect. boom, bing. There's no sequence there. It's instantaneous. As soon as the observation is gone, the observer and the observed, and the observer and the observed, gone. And that's true for all the triads. Agent, action, object of action. Take one out, the other two are gone. That is enough to realize emptiness. Because if I take out something that is, if you have A, B, C, and they are not the same, and if I take out A, which is definitely not the same at all from B and C, and in the very instant that I take out or obliterate A, B and C vanish. They weren't really there in the first place. Right? If I take out something that is not them, and yet in this instant of doing that, they're instantly gone, and then I put in something that's not them, and they're instantly there, then they weren't really there or really gone, because I didn't touch them. Right? Let's just go to the meditation. Let's figure this out. We're going to look into the nature of the observer so that we can see on the conventional level, what's it like, what's your feeling, what's your experience of being the observer. And this is still shamatha, because we're not investigating, but we're observing very, very closely. So after all of that arousal with words, concepts, activation of the intellect, give it a rest. Release it all. Release your awareness from the matrix of conceptualization. Let it descend into this conceptually quiet, empty space. This field of tactile sensations right down to the ground. A quiet space. Bring a quiet awareness, non-conceptual, into a non-conceptual space. A symmetry of knowing without labels or concepts. Let your awareness permeate the whole field so that sensations throughout the whole field appear to your awareness and are known by your awareness, which illuminates and knows them. And on the basis of this deep sense of ease, of release, relaxation, settle your body with the three qualities: relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. Settle your respiration, and finally your mind. And as we begin the main practice, let your eyes be open, your awareness evenly resting in the space in front of you without an object. With no interest in any appearances, not venturing out, not exploring, staying home, sitting by the warm hearth of your own awareness that itself illuminates everything else, but can, when you just stay at home, can illuminate and know itself, moment by moment. And when you strip awareness naked, unclothed from appearances, thoughts, and so on, then it's just pure consciousness, but not pure in some exalted or transcendent way, any more than just H2O, somehow sublime or transcendent. It's just H2O. This is just consciousness. We call it consciousness. But now examine closely, what is the referent? When you say, I'm experiencing, I'm knowing consciousness. Look closely to see exactly what is it that you are knowing. And I would suggest there are no grounds for doubt, no reason to be uncertain whether or not you actually are aware of being aware. It's obvious. You know you're not unconscious. That's it. So given that confidence, look again. Observe closely. What is this consciousness of which you are aware? What are its characteristics by which you can know it? Tsongkhapa said, it's sheer luminosity, it's sheer cognizance. Does that help? Can you see what he's talking about? And now we probe deeper. We were observing a flow, a continuum, an ongoing sense of being aware, and that's an authentic sense. We were. My experience is like observing the referent of a verb, playing baseball, drinking tea. It's an ongoing activity. Not too difficult. Do you know you're drinking tea? Do you know you're driving a car? Yeah. Do you know that you're conscious? That you're being conscious? Yeah. Do you know what it is of which you are conscious when you're aware of being aware? Well, look closely, and you will know. There's nothing hiding it, nothing veiling it. It's not obscure. But look closely rather than thinking closely. But then we look deeper to the referent of the noun. And that is when you're aware of being aware, that stream, that continuum, right now, do you have a sense of being the one who is aware? Or since you as an individual are designated on the basis of the mind, which is actually aware, let's toss out the personal pronoun, because it's not adding any new information. And look right at the basis of designation when we say, I am aware. I am aware because my mind is aware. If it weren't, I wouldn't be. So let's look at the real character, the real entity, the mind, that is the subjective observer in here. Sometimes observing the flow of being aware, sometimes observing the object, a person, a cup of tea. Observe now closely. What is your sense of the mind that is aware, that observes? Invert your awareness in upon that. What comes to mind? Whatever comes to mind is the right answer. The question is, what does come to mind? When you seek to observe that which is observing, to which we'll give the name, the mind. This is a bit strenuous, so then give yourself a break, relax, release your awareness into space. But not spacing out, not blanking out, as you release into space with no object, no thought, no appearance. Gently sustain the flow of being aware, but deeply relax as you do it. Then when you've had a breather, you're refreshed. You're ready to enter the ring again for round 2. Then gather your attention, concentrate your awareness, and invert it right in upon your experience of being the one who is aware or invert your awareness in upon the mind that is in fact aware, and see what comes to mind when you do so. Anything or nothing. Set your own oscillation, your own rhythm, whether it's short or long, inverting, probing, observing very closely, and then releasing and relaxing utterly while extending or holding the slender thread of awareness of awareness. Set your own rhythm. Or can join it with the breath if you find that helpful for a while. When you do examine closely, inverting in upon your experience of being the observer, if something does come to mind, some appearance of any kind, or a sense, just a sense of being someone in here, a sense of the mind being the observer, examine closely that appearance or that sense. And then ask, what is it that is aware of that appearance or that sense? And probe more deeply. And then relax. And then return and look again, more deeply, more deeply. What is this that is aware? What are its characteristics? If it's real, it must be knowable. If it's knowable, it must be knowable by way of its characteristics. We know the characteristics of consciousness, evident. What are the characteristics of the knowing mind? The observing mind. And as you cut through the veils of appearances, that are not appearances of the observing mind, but are just empty appearances. If you find that nothing comes to mind, observe now most deeply, what is it that is aware of nothing coming to mind? And observe that. Observe and release. Observe and release. Then for the last couple of minutes of this session, release all desire and aspiration. Let the pendulum come to rest in utter stillness. Release all effort, all modification. Release all doing. And just be aware, effortlessly. So very simply put, to summarize a lot of words before, the more clear one has a direct experience knowing the relative nature of consciousness. What does it look like when you experience it? What do you experience? That's how it appears. That's how it appears. The clearer you are there, pertaining to this conditioned phenomenon within samsara of consciousness, the clearer you are there, then when you seek to understand how does it actually exist, its ultimate mode of existence, then that'll be all the easier. If you really know what you're talking about, like a glass of water. And likewise, so in other words, you go from consciousness to Rigpa. A lovely metaphor that crops up a lot, His Holiness has used it, but it's everywhere in Dzogchen, is that our relative modes of awareness, mind, activities of the mind, are as it were frozen. So you have two ice cubes, then there's a very clear difference between the two. There's one, two, quite different. So the ordinary mind, consciousness, thoughts, activity, and so forth, are frozen. In the sense that they seem to be quite discrete, individuated, localized, doing this and that, chunks, immaterial chunks, frozen mind. Whereas when you ascertain the actual nature, the citta, which is the actual nature of the mind, which is its ultimate nature, in Dzogchen, the ultimate nature of the mind is not simply its emptiness of inherent nature, which is the right answer. If you're working completely within the bandwidth of Madhyamaka philosophy, that's the right answer. What's the ultimate nature of mind? Like the ultimate nature of anything else, emptiness. It's empty of inherent nature. That's the right answer. But in Dzogchen, then yes, that's the right answer, but there's a bit more. And here in Dzogchen, the great perfection, if you say, what is citta, bear in mind, citta is a noun, and then citta makes it mindness, as in empty and emptiness, mindness. And that is, what is it about it that allows it to be a mind? What is it about something being empty that enables it to be empty? Well, its emptiness enables it to be empty, in a manner of speaking. It's kind of sloppy speech, perhaps. But citta in Dzogchen is Rigpa. It's not a sheer negation. It's not a sheer absence of inherent nature. It's Rigpa, pristine awareness. And so, from citta to citta is from ice to fluid water. My mind is different than your mind. Your mind is different from your mind. It's different. That's just the way it is. And your mind is localized here. It's arising independence upon your brain, which is there, and his brain is over there, arising independence upon, damage the brain, damage the mind, so very localized. But then if we cut through that, you melt that. So something between fluid and frozen, the slush of the substrate consciousness. You can push this metaphor too far, perhaps. But if Nicola then melts, he goes into shamatha right now, Johnny on the spot. Translate that into Spanish. Right now, he just melts his male, middle-aged mind, Bulgarian mind, and melts it into substrate consciousness. Then it's still individuated. He's just tapped into his substrate consciousness, not John's, bearing his memories, his karma, not John's. He'll never experience the result of John's karma, ever. He doesn't remember, as long as he's just focusing on the contents of his own substrate consciousness. He'll never remember any of John's memories. So it is different. It's individuated, right? And yet, in a way, subtler than Nicola's mind versus John's mind. When you go down to substrate consciousness, then while their bodies are clearly, they've got real borders there, and the mind arising independence upon bordered brain clearly then has some, limitations. Whereas you go down to substrate consciousness, that's not dependent on any physical body here at all. Preceded Nicola's body will go on after Nicola's body. It's still individuated, but if you're looking for borders of a substrate consciousness, you're looking for something that just definitely doesn't exist. It's hard to imagine, but it can be known. It's best to know it from inside out. But this is where we're really going into deep territory and where Chittamatra has a lot to say. There are very large volumes on Chittamatra to explain if we have really released the notion altogether. It's drastic. If we really release the notion that there's any physical world out there at all separate from the mind, that there's no universe, no Big Bang, no 5 billion year old universe or planet and so forth and so on, no atoms, no particles, no fields, no waves, nothing out there at all independent of our perceptions, then you've got a lot of explaining to do. Of grass growing, food deteriorating in your refrigerator, the fact that human beings have been here for 200,000 years and the planet for 5 billion, you've got a lot of explaining to do. And they do. They do. And what is crucial to that explanation, Chittamatra, is that although these individual continua of the substrate consciousness are distinct, they're not blended into a collective substrate consciousness, nevertheless, the interrelationships among them, because John and Nicola know each other, so there's explicit interrelationship there, right? And they're doing something together now. They're listening to one person speak, and so they're there. I'm thinking of like something that I've never thought of before, and it's not very deep, but just a single neuron, and then how many synapses come out from a single neuron? Is it 10,000? Can't remember. A lot. So by the time you count all the neurons and all the synapses, it goes into, like trillions of connections. That, I think I got that part right. I'm not even, I'm a total amateur for the brain. But it's analogous to that. Even though this neuron here and this neuron, they're just different neurons, nevertheless, the neurons are not these little isolated packets inside the brain, like hermetically sealed, anything but. It's just the opposite. That they're all of these 100 billion neurons, that's the last number I heard. 100 billion happens to be the same number as the number of stars in an average galaxy. Coincidence, but there it is. A big number. 100 billion neurons, but then each of these has these synapses going out. And so then if you start doing the math of, well, how many connections are there? The number's going up so high. Because of they say it's the most complex physical entity known to humanity. Much more complex than a galaxy or anything like that. Just the complexity of the interrelationships of 100 billion neurons, let alone however many billions upon billions of glial cells. I think they're still trying to figure out how come there's so many of them, what do they do? But in a similar way then, the tendrils, the interconnectedness from our memories, from our karma, from our shared activities and so forth, of one individual substrate consciousness to another, inconceivably complex. And if you're looking for how does grass grow when nobody's looking, the consensuality of experience and so forth, that's where you look. That's where you look. So that was a bit of a tangent, a lot of explaining to do. So it is that. As we've gone within the Buddhist context, first looking at the secular approach, looking at the limitations of materialism, and then going right into Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, then that's the point I wanted to make. I find it very interesting. And that is, if you can live in that, if you can adopt that dreamlike vision, that dreamlike view of reality right now, daytime dream yoga a la Chittamatra, mind only, and you're actually viewing this as, that's all there is. That's all there is for me. I mean, these appearances, but there's nothing behind them that is objectively creating or even contributing to. No sensory input from some external physical world that's constraining what I can and cannot see. Nothing out there is constraining, because there is no physical universe whatsoever except for just a manner of speaking, but nothing outside of appearances. And the mind that is aware of appearances and the mind that does things, then you see, whoa, this is really dreamlike. Really dreamlike. And you say, well, okay, tell me a major difference, because they're still not the same. I'll give one. When you're having your own ordinary dream, it can be lucid or non-lucid, but it's not a paranormal dream. Somebody just recently wrote me, a mother wrote me, that she, and I think it was her daughter, had just recently been in the same dream together, but not only were they both appearing in the mother's dream, and both appearing in the daughter's dream, both they woke up and recounted their dreams. It was the same dream. That's going to be an unusual dream. That's unusual. But then ordinary dreams aren't like that. So ordinary dreams, just prosaic ordinary dreams, be they lucid or non-lucid, then they are the free creation, catalyzed by karma, of a single individual, and all the other people who appear in there don't transmigrate when you wake up, because they're actually not people at all. They're not individuals, they're not sentient beings. They appear to be like, really very much like, figures in a movie. The images, not the actors, they've moved on to the next movie, but the actors you're seeing in a movie. I find it interesting sometimes to watch old movies, like from the 1930s, where you can be certain everybody who appears in the movie is dead. Kind of strange, and there they are, you know, arousing emotions, and oh, Humphrey Bogart, go for it. Oh, you know, and hey, Boris, go for it. Oh. And there's just absolutely, the people who are in that play, they can't even remember who they were now. They've transmigrated. The chance that they remember being, you know, Clark Gable. Clark Gable, whoever he is now, probably doesn't recognize, he's probably watching that movie and say, wow, he's handsome. I wish I were handsome like him, you know. So they're just all gone, and it's only really truly empty appearances. I'm obviously just rambling here. But to be able to view, this is still dream yoga, this is dream yoga retreat, if you can go that far. And how do you get that far? This is where I'm going. How can you get that far? Because you know you've got a lot of explaining to do. The materialists, or just let alone materialists, the metaphysical realists, who seems to say, we've got it covered, it's atoms, waves, fields, and particles, that's the sensory constant, we've got it covered, why don't you just be comfortable with us? And then you start asking, and where do the appearances come from? Where does awareness come from? What's the nature of consciousness? What's the relationship between appearances and reality? They don't have an explanation at all, so that's not enough. They've got what looks like an explanation, and yet it just doesn't turn out. Because they have no understanding, I mean literally, it's not a criticism, it's just a fact. The physicists know a lot about, brilliant, I've studied it for 35 years, not as a professional, but a serious amateur. They know so much about space, time, matter, and energy. And yet, as we're seeing one after another, when they say, and by the way, what's out there when nobody's looking? And what's the nature of space, time? What are atoms? What is energy? You saw my sources. The most brilliant ones are saying, as a Nobel laureate says, atoms no longer figure. They're not really out there. Feynman saying, we don't know what energy is. And the Nima Akani Ahmed saying, most recently, space-time is not out there. It's not in the fundamental fabric of reality. So you've lost space-time, you've lost atoms, and you've lost energy. So what do you got out there that you actually know about anymore? So it's not exactly a complete theory. So you might want to jump out of that boat and jump in the Chittamatra boat and say, well, now we've solved that problem, but then you can ask, how does grass grow when nobody's looking? They've got some explaining to do. But here's my point, and that is, remember the black box, where you can't look inside the box, you just see a lot of effects coming out. And you simply cannot infer the causes if you never see them, and you never see them creating the effects, and you don't know that there must be this type of cause for that kind of effect. You can't infer smoke unless you've seen fire producing smoke, and know that only fire can produce smoke and not a dust storm or something else. I think it's really tight logic. But here now is really the point, and that is, then beyond appearances, which Sean Carroll acknowledges, and one after another, Gleiser acknowledges, Marcelo Gleiser, and so forth, we don't know what's out there prior to measurement and so forth. Here's how much we don't know. And I'm saying this with respect. And that is, we don't know what is out there, can't for all the reasons above, including first-rate experimental physics. We don't know what is out there. But equally important, we don't know what isn't out there. Because we don't know anything at all. And so if you were having kind of the subliminal assumption, I get it, according to Chittamatra, there is nothing out there, you might want to ask, how do you know that? Because all you do know is that you don't know what is out there. But if you don't know what's in the closet, that doesn't mean you know there's nothing in the closet. It just means you don't know, right? Closet, universe outside of appearances. And so this is the conclusion I don't see how I can get around. It's just my thinking, I've never read this anywhere, is that beyond the scope, beyond the domain of appearances and mind being aware of appearances, outside of that, it just goes beyond any conceptual category. You can't say that what exists, that outside of appearances and mind, something exists. You can't say that because you don't know what you're talking about. But you also can't say, I think, I'd be willing to debate it, but you're not now, we're too busy, that beyond the space of appearances and mind that experiences appearances, you also can't say there is nothing, because that's a conclusion and an affirmation of knowledge. I know there's nothing in the closet, but you don't know unless you've opened the closet and you can look inside. You can't say, I didn't see anything, therefore I know it's empty. You didn't even open the door and you don't know how to open the door. So you don't know there's nothing and you don't know there's something. So beyond the scope of mind and appearances, it's beyond the conceptual categories. Does this ring a bell? Beyond the conceptual categories of exist and not exist. Because what is beyond the scope of the mind has to transcend, if there's anything at all, has to transcend the categories created by the mind. And two of the fundamental categories created by the mind are exist and not exist. But the Chittamatrans, like virtually everyone else, from materialists, naive realists, metaphysical realists, Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, and including Chittamatra, they say, all right, Chittamatra's gone as further than anybody else has in that sequence. They've gone deeper. They've cut deeper and questioned assumptions that most people never get around to questioning and don't want to. It would shake them up too much. And they're just left with this dream-like reality we're experiencing and knowing that everybody else. So what's the difference between an individual dream? There's only one director. There's only one sentient being. And that's not a sentient being in the dream, because that's a figment of your imagination. But there's only one substrate consciousness from which that emerges. Right? That. So it's individual. When you stop dreaming, the contents don't go anywhere. Nobody died, nobody lived, nobody came from anywhere, nobody goes anywhere, because they're not there at all. They're just an appearance. But in this one right now, obviously it's different. Any one of us could die, the rest will be here. And we'll go someplace else. And there are, let's say 160, there are 160 perspectives on this collective dream. And we're having shared karma here. But any one of us could die, 159 could die, and there's still somebody seeing the room. But not because there's a room independent of all 160, it's just that one perspective is still illuminating the room that appears in the awareness of that individual, in the substrate of that individual. So that's the difference. Collective versus the individual. Intersubjective, I would suggest in an ordinary dream, not like the mother and daughter in the same dream, in an ordinary dream there is no intersubjective experience at all. Nobody else in the dream has a perspective of their own. Not if they didn't exist anywhere before the dream started, and they didn't. They were not like unpaid actors waiting to get a role. hanging out. When is he ever going to dream of me? I have been waiting for so long. Nothing like that. And they don't become out-of-work actors after, they just get older, they're not good looking anymore, and they hang out, oh, I'm too old to get in this dream anymore. Silly, right? And so I think that's the difference. Monosubjective versus intersubjective. But neither one, both in Chittamatra, we say neither one is more substantial. Because all that anyone is ever experiencing is appearances in their own individual substrate. But the substrates are entangled, like one neuron with 10,000 synapses going out. But this is not 10,000, this is 100,000, a million, billion, probably inconceivable number of interconnectivity between not only human beings, of course, but we're sharing this environment with 20 billion animals, last count. I checked. 13.8 billion human beings, 20 billion animals. Although we're wiping them out very quickly right now. But overall, until we started decimating the planet, it was about 3 billion animals per human being. And we have the shared karma of being in the same place and experiencing, intersubjectively, the same planet. Although there is no planet independent of all the creatures, 20 billion plus our 3.8 billion, tiny, tiny, minuscule fraction. There is no inhabited world. There's no you remember, there's no vessel. There's no container. There's no planet Earth. There's no planet Earth unless somebody's experiencing it. Then it's just a meteor, a rock, but it's not a loka, it's not a world. So if we don't have that to rely upon, that is some external physical world, then as I was about to say, and I'll say it now, something has to be real. Something must be real. It's not just words. Because we're just right next door to Sautrantic, you remember? And they say, well, okay, in a manner of speaking, this cell phone has an owner. But come on. Okay, it exists only conventionally. And it doesn't exist as soon as I say, John, would you like my cell phone? He said, sure. Then it's not mine anymore. So that's existence by the skin of your teeth. Just because people say it's my cell phone versus yours. That's all it is. It's got no power to it. There's nothing there in and of itself that says I belong to Alan or John. It's just wispy, almost so insignificant. It's just, as they say, those are just words. Those are just words. Which means we're not taking them really seriously at all. And so this is what Vajira is saying about the chariot. It's just words. What's real, what really hits you in the teeth is real, and that's suffering. Call it whatever you like. Call the chariot a paperweight, and then it's a paperweight. But call suffering a paperweight, it still hits just as hard. So something's got to be real. And for her, it's suffering. Four Noble Truths. In Chittamatra, it can't all just be words. Because words, they're just empty. They're just a conceptual designation. This place is a college versus anything else you want it to be. All they have to do is designate it something else. As a high school, elementary school, a convention center. It's no longer a college, no longer a branch of University of Wales. So something's got to be real. And I'll get to this point and then we'll take our break. But I think it's pretty important. And that is, outside of appearances, we can't say existent or non-existent, because if we said either, it would imply we know something, but we don't. We don't know anything at all. So we can't even impute existent or non-existent. We just have to be quiet. Say, well, if there's anything, it transcends anything I can possibly think or say. But something must be real. And here's where the Madhyamika comes in. He said, whoa, you went deep. You really went deep. You've just knocked out the entire physical world that almost everybody else believes in. And now you put all your money in the bank. You've withdrawn, you divested everything from some external physical world that exists independently of appearances. You've completely withdrawn all your savings from that and said that's worth nothing. It's neither even existent nor non-existent. I mean, that's even less than nothing. And you've put all your investment in the one reality, chitta matra, only mind only. And then mind only includes, of course, appearances to mind. So now and then an appearance is the mind, or appearance is only because there's the mind, and the mind is primary. Appearances come and go, right? Appearances come and go, you fall deep asleep, appearances are gone, but there's still subtle mind. So that's there, it's still there, even in the substrate, it's implicit, it didn't become non-existent. Even when the substrate consciousness dissolves into the substrate, it didn't become non-existent, it's still there. It's a sleeping bear. You know, throw a rock at the bear, it will come out. Substrate's ready to come out at any moment. Oh, it didn't become non-existent. So, you're saying you put all your money in the bank of mind. Mind only. At most, everything else is derivative of mind. Beyond that which is derivative of mind, not even nothing. Not even nothing. So now, you've thrown out the external physical world because you can never observe it. And it's not knowable as being either existent or non-existent. You've thrown it out, chucked it out, for lack of evidence. I'm very sorry to do this to you. But let's go to your bank account. To the mind that knows all of these things, observes all of these things, does all of these things, engages in virtuous act and a non-virtuous act. They're virtuous and non-virtuous not because what comes out your mouth and not what happens with your body. That doesn't determine whether something is virtuous or not virtuous. It's what's going on in the mind when your speech or your physical body go into action that determines virtue and non-virtue. What kind of karma are you accruing? The mind really is primary. And so the mind, you put all your money, all your life savings into the mind as this alone is real. You've pointed out the external world outside of mind is unknowable, and therefore released it even beyond non-extinction, even beyond existent or non-existent. Boy, that's total annihilation. That's annihilation beyond annihilation, because it's not even annihilated. Let's do the same thing. I dare you, Chittamatran, have the guts to see whether there's actually any money in the bank or it's only your imagination. Look into the mind. Can you observe your mind, the knower, the doer, the all-creator of all of samsara? Can you find the mind any more than you could find the world independent of mind? You've blown that one away, but now I'm looking into your account. Can you find the mind? If so, what does it look like? Where is it? Where did it come from? Where is it located? Where does it go? What are its characteristics? Is it knowable? If it's knowable, start talking. Don't talk about appearances. Don't talk about mental activities. Don't talk about we know that. We're cool. But you've thrown out the object, and now I want to see if there's a real subject. Don't tell us about in-between. Science tells a lot about in-between. Just don't pretend that it's external. It's in-between. It's in the Lebenswelt, the worldview. Is your mind any more real, any more findable, knowable than the external physical world that you've chucked out lock, stock, and barrel? And if you can't find it, you're going to have to do some major rethinking here. Because you have now nothing on which to place the burden of reality. Not the external physical world that the metaphysical realists, and especially the materialists, say. After all, that's all that's really real, and its emergent properties. Materialists feel very comfortable with that and have no understanding at all of consciousness, or even qualia. That's a kind of a big lacuna. But now, if the mind also is in the same way and known in the same way, unfindable, then it's no more real than the external physical world. In which case, it can't take the burden, because you can't even find it, any more than you can find some atom out.